Okay, today's daf we're going to learn Shabbat Mem Zayin. Today's shir is sponsored by Alana Storage in appreciation of Hadran. Thank you for giving us the chizuk and continuing to inspire us, the women of Hadran, daily with the love of learning. Okay, with that, we will start at the very top of Mem Zayin. What we had here was, we finished, and that's what we're going to pick up with, this idea of a basis l'davar ha'asur, okay, where something could function as a base for something that's forbidden. So what we said is that if something functions and it's holding something that's forbidden, then it can't be moved. So now we're going to see here, Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Amar Rabbi Romanus. Okay, very long-winded way of saying, who said this. Okay, but pay attention to the people. Because Rabbi Zera is going to say this in the name of Rabbi Asi, who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Romanus won't be as important for us, even though they're the ones who really said it in the beginning. Anyway, he said, Li hitir Rebbe litaltel machtaba ofra. So he said, Rebbe matir'd me, this is what they said, Rabbi Romanus said, Rebbe allowed me to carry a coal pan full of ashes. What did they use this coal pan for? It was used for incense. So they had a coal pan with incense, and the incense had burnt out, and all they were left with was ashes. Now you would say ashes are muktzah. So therefore they say here, how did Rebbe, they're going to say, in a minute they're going to question this. This should be basically what we called a minute ago, a basis l'davar ha'asur. Here you have a coal pan it's kind of a crossover between a basis l'davar ha'asur and actually a klisha melachto l'isur, because you use this to make a fire to burn the incense, which you can't do on Shabbat. So it's kind of like, it could be either or really. So he says, Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Asi. So now Rabbi Zera, who said this in the name of Rabbi Asi, says directly to Rabbi Asi, even though he said it, he says to Rabbi Asi, Mi amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi, did you really hear Rabbi Yochanan say this? It seems a little bit strange. So he says, V'hatznan, doesn't it say in the Mishnah, Notel Adam beno v'ha'even biyado. If you can pick up your child, even if he's carrying a rock in his hand. O kilkela v'ha'even bitocha. Or you could take a basket and the rock is in the basket, because, again, the rock is secondary to something that is allowed to be carried. But the rock, right, you can carry a child, you just can't carry a rock, because a rock, we said, is muktzah machmak ufo. So yet, if you're carrying something else, then you can carry it with it. The Amar Rabbi Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the kilkelam ale'ah perot askinan. So what does he say? He said, it's only if the basket, you have a basket, okay, and you're carrying the basket with the rock inside. You can only do that if the basket is full of fruits. And therefore, it sounds like, because it's milea perot, tamadi papere, hale papere lo. It sounds like the only reason why this is allowed is because there's fruits inside the basket. If there weren't fruits inside the basket, what would be happening? You'd be carrying this basket with the rocks, and the basket is basically functioning as a basis, as a base for something that's not allowed to be carried. And only if, and this is what we call, you can say a basis l'davar hamutar ve'asur, meaning if the basket is carrying fruits which are allowed, and also the rock, well then it's a basis for both, and then it can be carried. So now we're back to our machta, the coal pan full of the ashes. Well, there's nothing mutar in there. So how could he possibly carry this? How could he possibly matir this? So his immediate reaction was, I'm going to go think about this. Okay, right? This is a good lesson, right? Don't try to answer immediately, but you don't always have to have all the answers. So he says, let me go think about this. And then he said, okay, wait, I got it. It must be that there was still some of the frankincense. Okay, kartin is an amount. It's a quart. It's a very small amount. He said there must have been a little bit of frankincense left in the coal pan, and because of that, Rebbe allowed it to be carried. So now they asked a question. This goes back to something somebody asked yesterday in the chat, which I didn't respond to because I didn't know the answer, and I said I'm going to go think about this a little bit. So now we're going to get back to this about is there something called subjective muktzah? We saw yesterday with the woman who wanted to cancel her vows, you know, the husband canceled the woman's vows, and how an item could have been muktzah. It sounded like just for her. And we're going to see here that it does seem like muktzah can be something subjective. It's something that can be muktzah to me, might not be muktzah for you. Like if I set aside rocks for a particular use, then they're mutar to me, but they're not, you didn't put them aside for any reason. And theoretically, they might not be mutar for other people. So it seems like, again, where exactly we draw the line about what could be muktzah, how subjective, it can be is a good question. I don't have all the answers, but there seems to be something subjective about this. So what do they answer now? So the whole answer is, we're actually going to have three answers to this question about this machta with the ashes. So the first answer is that it was a basis ledavar hamutar v'ha'asur, okay, and that there was a little bit of frankincense in that coal pan. So comes Abai and he questions this and he says, Kartim be'Rebbe, Rebbe was very wealthy. If you had a little bit of frankincense in it, that certainly wouldn't make it anything of any importance. So he says, if you want to say, well, it is ra'oi for poor people would be happy with a little bit of frankincense. It would be meaningful for them. The Hatanya doesn't it say in a Braita? Now this topic is a different topic. But bigdei aniyim la'aniyim, bigdei ashirim la'ashirim. Okay, remember this topic? This was about tuma, things that are susceptible to impurities. And we said the size of a piece of cloth depends on whether you're wealthy or whether you're poor, right? That a poor person would use even a small little piece of cloth, he won't throw out. So therefore, we're going to say like this. Bigdei aniyim, according to this Braita, are only susceptible to impurities for poor people, okay? But if you're rich and you have this cloth that you would just throw in the garbage, it's not going to be susceptible to impurities for you. Bigdei ashirim la'ashirim, right? And for them, they have their own. Aval da'aniyim la'ashirim lo. But bigadim that are ra'oi for aniyim, that a poor person would use, are not going to be susceptible to impurities for rich people. So therefore, this coal pan of Rebbe's, how could he have allowed it to be carried, even if it had a little bit of frankincense, even if you say, well, for poor people, this is relevant, but for him it wasn't. And muktzah seems subjective. So Elam Arbai, and the Mishnah Berurah, by the way, there's a I forgot to write down the citation, but I'll look it up for tomorrow. But when I looked at it there, he's quoted specifically the issue of clothing. Okay, he used this Braita and talked about it as regards muktzah. Okay, in terms of things that aren't relevant to you. Anyway, Ella Amar Abai. So Abai says, I'll give you a different answer. Midi dahavi agerav shali'i, a chamber pot, okay, that's full of feces. Now this is interesting. We talked before about something that's muktzah machmat mi'us. Okay, I want to make sure you don't confuse these terminologies. Muktzah machmat mi'us is something that's so disgusting that you don't want to have anything to do with it on Shabbat, and you put it out of your mind, right? It's as if I'm not going to ever go near this. But what about something that is so disgusting and it's in your way? Normally you can't move muktzah items, but if something's so disgusting, then we allow you to move it to get it out of your way. That's a geref shori. If you have a chamber pot, you're allowed to move it because it's disgusting and we don't want it near us. So we allow that. So Abai says, maybe that's the same thing with this coal pan full of ashes. It's like a geref shori. Now you might say it's not exactly, and that's exactly what Rav is going to say. That Abaye, you're making a bad comparison. I'm a Rav shtei tshuvo b'tavach. He says I have two things to say against what you just said. Chada geref shori ma'is v'hai lo ma'is. First of all, geref shori is disgusting, and this is not disgusting. This is just you know, it's maybe ashes. You don't really want it, but it's not disgusting. I see someone asked about an example of muktzah machmat mi'us. So this is what it is, a chamber pot full of feces. It's a terrible smell. Let's say you have something in your house and there's a really bad odor coming out of it. Now, it would be anything that you don't want to have anything to do with is muktzah. So theoretically, that would be muktzah. If there's some, I don't know, someone just told me they put up beans to try to sprout. She said it had an awful smell to it. So imagine on Shabbat, right, you put aside those beans, you're not planning to use them, and then there's this awful smell going on. It's in your kitchen and it's disgusting. So theoretically, that would be something that you can move because the smell is so bad. So now we're going to say, but this isn't ma'is, ve'od, and secondly, geref shori'i megale, v'hamichase. Okay, apparently this coal pan, the way it worked was it was covered, but it had holes in it so that you would put it on a fire, it would warm up, and then, or you put a fire inside it. I don't know if you even need a fire underneath. you put a fire inside of it, and then it would have holes, and the holes would allow the smell to come out. So he basically says a geref sharia chamber pot is open, and it's not disgusting, right? But I'm sorry, it's open, and because of that, it's disgusting. This is covered. So because this is covered, this is not an issue. I see someone wrote about garbage in your bin, right? That would be a good example. Garbage, you obviously don't want to have anything to do with the garbage anymore. You put it aside, that's really muktzah once you throw things in the garbage. But you're allowed to move them, right? Or on the table. Certain things are allowed to be removed if they're disgusting, like bones, that you don't want on the table. Bones, theoretically, why are you allowed to clear them off the table, right? They're disgusting at this point. You don't plan to use them anymore unless you have a dog and you want to give them to the dog, but assuming you don't. So, right, so then it's a question, right? How disgusting does something have to be? And that could be a subject of debate here. In fact, Abaye thought that this was disgusting. So obviously disgusting is also something somewhat subjective, right? And different people might think different things. So, okay, we'll leave it at that right now. So therefore, Rava doesn't accept Abaye. So again, we're back to the question, how did Rebbe allow this machtal, this coal pan to be moved? Ella amarava ki avinam be Rav Nachman hava metaltalinan kavna agav kitma. Va'af agav diika ale shivrei etzim. He kind of switches things around. He says, we used to carry this pan that had it at ashes, and we carried it for the ashes. What was the part that was muktzah in the pan? Actually, the little twigs of wood were what was problematic in the pan, but we allowed it because it was a basis l'davar hamutal ve'hasur, and the ashes were actually what allowed it. He says, and therefore, this can be carried for the ashes. Now, what do you do with ashes? So first of all, we actually saw the ashes. Where do we see it? They would cover up the fire with ashes, remember? But that's not something you could do on Shabbat, so that wouldn't help us. But Rashi says, they would use ashes to cover up saliva or feces or something disgusting. They would actually use this to cover it. So therefore, the korban was allowed to be moved because the ashes actually didn't mean it was a basis davar hasul. Okay, the ashes were actually needed. Okay, now we're going to bring up contradiction. Made today. So now they say, wait a minute. It says that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda agree that in the case where you have wicks, broken wicks. Okay, remember Rabbi Shimon said that you can carry the oil once in the lamp. Once the wick burns, you're allowed to carry the oil. You're allowed to use it. You can do whatever you want with it. But he agrees that if there's little pieces of wicks inside, then it's asur. Now, theoretically, if we just said that it's a basis davar hamutar v'hasur, you would think that what's more, it all goes by importance. I'll give you an example, by the way. There's a clear halachic, this is a big halachic discussion that comes up about this. If you have a candelabra and it's on a platter or at a tray, and you put it, let's say, on your table or somewhere, and you want to move the tray. So you can't move the tray because the tray is a basis davar hasul, right? Even once the candles have burnt out. However, what people do is, if you want to move it, you put a challah roll on it. Now, why a challah roll? Because it has to have something of importance. A challah roll is part of the mitzvot of Shabbat. And now we're going to see that it has to have kind of equal importance. Okay, so the challah roll is important for Shabbat, and the candles are important for Shabbat. So now you have a basis for something mutal and asur. So now they say, look, you have these wicks that are burnt out. And he says here in this braita, that even Rabbi Shimon agrees that if there's wicks, little broken pieces of wicks inside, then asur l'taltel. Now you would think, what's more important? The oil's more important. And yet it's still asur, even though there's this davar hamutal. So how could that be? So Amar Abaye, b'galila shanu. So Abaye answers, that was in the Galil. What's the difference? Again, we're now going to talk about all sorts of subjective things. So in the Galil, apparently, flax was hard to come by, although some debate this because it's not so clear, because there's places where they talk about flax and they had a lot of flax. But anyway, let's just stick with the idea that either flax was hard to come by and therefore the flax was valuable. So broken pieces of flax are valuable. Or you could say that oil was so plentiful. In other words, it's all a matter of supply and demand, right? Basic economics. It doesn't even necessarily have to be that the ptila was so important because, let's say very expensive, but it's so hard to come by, but it could be that the oil was just so plentiful that it wasn't so important. And it was, am I saying it the wrong way? Right? And the chashuvotim shivrei ptila, right. either the shivrei p'tila were so important or the oil was so unimportant that the shivrei p'tila become the more important thing, and therefore you can't carry it. This is the opposite, right? In our case, you can't carry it because the more important thing is the item that's muktzah, okay? Because even Rabbi Shimon would agree that even if flax is important, this is a little bit tricky. Even though flax was important, the shivrei p'tila you clearly weren't intending to use on Shabbat for anything, okay? You put your mind aside from the wicks. What's a wick? A wick is useful for relighting. So you might want to relight this wick, but then you're certainly not going to use it on Shabbat. And that makes this item muktzah. Okay, so we've resolved that issue. And now again, what do we have? We had a question, how did Rebbe allow this? We had 3 answers given. Okay, you can look at the chart, the sheet, it kind of organizes it, right? There's 3 answers. One was, it has a little bit of frankincense in it. We didn't really like that because that's not really so important, certainly not for Rebbe. Then we said maybe it's like this Geref Shara'i that you can move because it's disgusting. And then the third option was that you're allowed to move it specifically because of the ashes can be used for something else. Okay, I see a note here that Beit Shan and Ein Hakshatot were major producers of flax. So they did have a lot of flax there. However, it was very expensive. So there you have a good answer. Okay, thank you, Jackie. Okay, moving on. Levi bar Shmuel eshkechinu l'Rabbi Abba l'Rav Huna bar Chia tavu kaime apitcha debei Rav Huna. Okay, he saw them. They were in the entrance of Rav Huna's house. Amar lehu. He said to them, "Ma'u lachzir mitar shel tarsim b'Shabbat." Okay, now we're on a different topic. We talked about this menorah, the candelabra that was made of parts. So now the question is, can you put together things that are kind of made in parts that kind of have to be put together? Can you do this on Shabbat? Okay, can you be, so what is a mitashel tarsim? So either it's a loom, okay, a loom that was made up in parts, or it's, Rashi says, shorfei nechoshet, or it was some sort of implement that the smiths used, okay, some sort of bed, or I don't know, again, we see bed is used here in a lot of different meanings, but it's something either weavers used, and Rashi says, okay, they would go from place to place. Julie, maybe you'll go on tour soon and take your loom in parts and take it around the country and show everybody. So here it's a loom in parts or some sort of other utensil in parts. So now, what does he say? Can you put this back together? Okay, can you make it on Shabbat? Let's say you've gotten to a new city and you want to put it together on Shabbat. So first of all, I guess you'd have to say that you were using it for something that wasn't forbidden, right? Because otherwise, why would you be allowed to do this on Shabbat? So Amalei Shapir Dami, you can actually. Okay, so now he comes before, Levi bar Shmuel, right, goes to Rabbi Abba and he asks them the following question. Then he goes to Rabbi Yehuda. He's not so satisfied with his answer. So he goes to Rabbi Yehuda and he asks him, Amar, ha-Rav Shmuel, Amrit Travayu, Amachzir mitashel tarsim Shabbat chayav chatat. He says, what do you mean? They say it's forbidden by the Torah. So he went to one rabbi and he said it's totally permitted. He goes to another rabbi, he says it's forbidden, midoraita. So first of all, you have a very wide range here. What would be the chiyuv chatat? So Rashi says, hu tchilato vegamro. Okay, it means if you do the entire thing. V'nimtza osekli v'chayav mishum makebet patish. Okay, he says this must be boneh. I'm sorry, this must be makebet patish and not boneh. There's actually a debate here. Are you building something? Is that your problem? Is that your issue? Or is it not boneh? Why is it not boneh? There's a big debate, and this is why I wanted to put Rashi here. There's a whole opinion that there's no such thing as binyan by kli. Binyan means building a structure, a building, binyan like an ohel, but not building a kli. Just putting together a kli is actually an issue of makebet patish, and therefore it's only going to be an issue if you actually finish it. But if you leave it in the middle, you're not actually chayav of boneh. If you start building a house, you're chayav mishum boneh, even if you didn't finish building the house. So here you have this important statement about ein binyan b'kelim. We'll get to that later also more. Anyway, what happens? So one says it's mutar, one says it's asor midoraita. So how do we resolve this? So first they bring a mate today. They bring a contradiction. Hamachzir kaneh, they bring a Tannaitic source. This is going to talk about it. Hamachzir kaneh menorah b'Shabbat chayav chatat. So here you have it. This goes against the first group of rabbis who said that it was okay, because here it says, if you put back a piece of the candelabra on Shabbat, this is obviously a candelabra in parts, you're chayav chatat. It's asur midoraita. Kanes sayadin. Okay, what if you have a plasterer's pole? Okay, this is, I was thinking, if you have a picker, I have a picker at home, right? And you can adjust, they have these adjustable pickers. You could adjust the different heights. So it's that kind of thing where you can adjust. That's how Rashi explains it. He says, you can, where does he say it? He basically, it's not exactly like my picker because my picker has it all built in. But the old-fashioned way, right, you just add another part to it. So that, you're not, right, you're not allowed to. This is a little bit different than the menorah. If you did it, it's only asur midrabanan. Rabbi Simai Omer, keren agula chayav, keren pshuta patur. This was a musical instrument. One is very simple, and one is, it's kind of a trumpet type thing, a blow instrument. So the keren agula was a rounded one. You can see in the Quran they have a picture. It was very complicated, so to build it was much more complex. So the keren pshuta was a little bit more like a shofar type thing. So to put that together was much simpler. So therefore, the keren agula you're chayav, keren pshuta patur. Again, patur means asur midrabanan, but allowed from the Torah. So how do you see it? This seems to contradict the one who says it's mutar, right? Because this menorah is asur midoraita. So inu da amur ki hai tana detanya. The person who says, the rabbis who held it was allowed, held by a different opinion. In other words, whenever you bring a Tana to, right, we brought a Braita to contradict. That Braita, don't worry about that contradicting because he holds by a different Tana, someone else from the Tanaitic time period. How do we know? What's the source? Malbino tamita. Okay, there's a few different interpretations, but we'll go with, at the bottom of your chairs, usually, you have a little rubbery piece that sits at the bottom, right? Let's say the chair is made of, the leg is made of metal, and you have a little plastic piece at the bottom so it doesn't scrape the floor. So in those days also they would put something underneath in order, I'm not sure they were so worried about scraping the floor, that floors were made of dirt, but they were worried about it rotting, right? In the dirt it might get mildewy. So they would put these malbeinot. So can you put those in on Shabbat? Or kra'ot hamita, the legs themselves. Okay, the bed would be made of a frame with, you'd stick the legs inside. Uluchim shel skibas. Okay, this was some sort of piece of wood that they would attach to the bow in order to shoot the bow and arrow. It would kind of go, it would just kind of, fit in. And then from that, they would shoot the arrow. Lo yachzir, you can't put them back in their place if they're not in place. V'im yachzir, patur alasul. Okay, only asur midrabanan. V'lo yitka. Okay, this doesn't help us yet because we're looking for someone who says it's actually allowed. V'lo yitka, you can't kind of hammer it into place very well. V'im taka chayav chatat. And if you put it in very well, then you're chayav chatat. Okay, if you kind of start hammering it in, right? Rashi says with yetedot, right? With, let's say, nails. So that would for sure be asur midoraita. Here comes our opinion. But if it was very loose, then you could do it. And what he seems to be saying, again, there's a few different interpretations here. What he seems to be saying is, if you put it together very loosely, then it's allowed. It's once you start really putting it together, and the whole concern why we asked you this midrabanan is since if you're going to be tokea, right, and you really hammer it in, it's forbidden. Therefore, we don't allow it some other way, lest you might come to hammer it in. But Rashbam says that if it's so loose, then we're not worried that you're going to hammer it in. Or maybe he means if it's something that in general fits together loosely. There's different interpretations exactly what he means. But somehow he allows it in this loose manner. And that explains what they were talking about when he asked the question about a mitashel tarsim, then we must be talking about putting it together loosely. And that's why he allowed it. And those who forbade it, Rabbi Yehuda, and this is a good example, you could say it could be now, Rabbi Yehuda, if it was only loose, I got to imagine even Rabbi Yehuda didn't think it was asur midoraita, and maybe he wasn't actually, he didn't ask his question in the same way to both of them. Maybe he wasn't clear, or someone didn't ask enough of the details to really figure out what it was. Anyway, that's how they resolved the contradiction. We don't really know what the reality was and what he asked and what they knew, and this is all just a possible answer as to how we can, again, it's one says asur midoraita and one says mutar legamre. We have to figure out how this could possibly be. So he must hold a Rashbam who says it's allowed if it's loose. Be Rav Chama have a mita galalita. Okay, in the house of Rav Chama there was a put together bed, right, like a bed that kind of comes out in parts and is easily put together. Have a mahadri lebi yom tova. Okay, and they would put it together on Yom Tov. Amar le'ahu midrabanan l'Rava. So then this rabbi said to Rava, "My datich, what were they thinking? Binyamin atzadhi, the Yiddi Doraita like Surah Rabbanit Mia Ika." Says, I can't imagine what they were thinking. If you're going to call this binyan minatzad, okay, notice here they do call it binyan, even though it's a kli. Okay, so you have to raise a bit of a question. But maybe even you're going to say makebet patish. It's a makebet patish, right? Finishing the kli, just using the words of binyan, even though he doesn't really mean that. But even if you're going to say, I'm doing this differently than the normal way we build, because you don't normally build in this way, right? Putting these pieces together is not a normal manner of building. But even if you say it's done with some sort of shinoi, that's still shinoi only drops something from a doraita level to a dorabanan level. So how could you be allowing this? So what does he answer? Amar le, ana kirashbag spirale damar imayarafuim mutar. Oh, I hold like Rashbag, who says that if it was loose, it's okay, and therefore when they built this bed on Shabbat, they must have been building it in a loose manner. Okay, new Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah we saw before because they quoted it earlier. Notnim kli tachat haner likabel nitzotzot. You can put a utensil, a plate, let's say, under, or a bowl, under the nair, under the candle, to catch, not to catch the oil we had said before, but you could put it to catch sparks. Below yutain l'tochomayim, but you can't put water in that utensil, because that will extinguish the sparks as soon as they land. So now we're going to have a bit of a discussion about both these parts. First question is, we asked this question before. Isn't this basically saying this kli is no longer to be used on Shabbat because now it's going to have these sparks on it? So, no, we already learned that sparks don't really have anything to them, and therefore it's not going to turn out to not be able to be used because the sparks kind of disappear after a minute, and therefore the kli can be moved if there's nothing on it. Below, as opposed to what we saw before with if something falls into the kli that's muktzah, then it would make the kli not able to be used anymore. So we're going to assume now that our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi say? Okay, it's a very famous case. If you have a fire going on Shabbat, you're not allowed to put out the fire. But what do the rabbis allow you to do? You can put big barrels full of water around, or jugs full of water around the fire. The assumption is that when the fire gets close to the jugs, it'll make the jugs explode. The water will come splashing down, and in that way you can put out your fire. I don't know if you want to try this, but right. But that's the way he says you can put out a fire. So now Rabbi Yossi disagrees and says, no, that's gram kiboy. You're indirectly causing it to extinguish, and that's asur. Okay, so they're now going to say, well, same thing here. The assumption is that lo yitain l'tocho mayim, you can't put water in. Now, right now, it sounds like we're talking on Shabbat because Rabbi Yossi was talking on Shabbat. So on Shabbat, you can't put water in there because it's going to cause them to be extinguished, and it sounds like it's Rabbi Yossi who says, Gram kiboy is asur. So lematnan stamach Rabbi Yossi, are we going to assume our stam tana goes like Rabbi Yossi? Generally, they don't like to have a stam mishnah that goes just by one person's opinion, and probably an opinion we don't hold by. Damar gram kiboy asur. Right? He goes against the rabbis and thinks this is forbidden. So now they say, B'tizbara, is that what you think? Imor da'amar Rabbi Yossi, and how could you think this is Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi was talking about Bishabbat. Be'erev Shabbat, mi amar. He wasn't talking about before Shabbat. Now, the assumption is that our Mishnah means even before Shabbat, you can't do this. They're going to say, and if you think maybe our Mishnah meant you can't put water in the kli on Shabbat, no. There's a bright about our Mishnah that says the following. You can put this utensil, the first part of our Mishnah, you can put it under the candle, even on Shabbat, right? The Ein Sarich Lomar, the Erev Shabbat. If we allow it on Shabbat, then obviously on Erev Shabbat it's going to be allowed. Here it's the exact opposite. We're going to say that you can't put water, according to the Braita, even before Shabbat. This is very interesting, right? You can't do something before Shabbat that you're basically causing something to be extinguished on Shabbat. Okay? So, by the way, this would be a question. There's people who put, I've seen this before, candles in a little glass jar. There's that candle that fits in. You buy them in the store. They're the exact fit for those little glass jars. And I think, I don't know, sometimes people put water underneath so that when it gets to the bottom, it kind of goes out. So according to this, it would be forbidden. I think you really can't do that on Shabbat because of this. Okay, don't quote me la halacha on it, but I think that would be an important. It would come straight from here. It sounds to me like. So anyway, it says lo yitem l'shochamayim mipnei shu mechabeh me'erev Shabbat ve'en tzarich lomar b'Shabbat, and therefore this can't be Rabbi Yossi because Rabbi Yossi's opinion was only on Shabbat. Now we're going to say, well then, all the more our mission is more machmir than Rabbi Yossi because Rabbi Yossi said gram kiboy is asur on Shabbat. But presumably before Shabbat, you could do that. Like, let's say you were worried about having a fire in your house. So before Shabbat, according to Rabbi Yossi, you don't have a problem to put all these jugs out. So what's going on in our Mishnah? It must be something else going on here. So Amar Rav Ashi, afilu tema Rabbanan, even the rabbis who matired kiboy in the case of the jugs won't allow it here. And even from before Shabbat, clearly this is a different issue. This is not the same as gram kiboy. Gram kiboy is much more indirect. This is basically direct. You put the water there, as soon as the fire gets down, right, the sparks go down, they're going to be, the assumption is that for sure there are sparks that come out, and therefore, as soon as the sparks come out, they're going to be extinguished, or maybe even if there aren't sparks, but if there were to be sparks, they would immediately go out, and since you're putting it there in order to put out the sparks, this is not allowed. That's not the same as putting the jugs, which is already much more indirect. So the rabbis allow the jugs, but they wouldn't allow this. And Rabbi Yossi doesn't allow the jugs, and he wouldn't allow this, but this is different because this is all even from Erev Shabbat, okay, which is actually a nice lead-in to our next section, which is about Hatmana. So Hadran Lav Kira, we're going to finish Parak Kira now, and we're moving on to the next parak about Hatmana. So we talked about Hatmana before. I'll review. Hatmana, there's two opinions. Either it's wrapping something entirely, either on 3 sides or maybe even 4 sides, entirely in something. In some material that's going to keep the heat in. Okay, there's 2 types of materials we're going to discuss already. The first Mishnah, we're going to get to this. There's materials that are, we call mosif hevel, they add heat, and there's materials that are not mosif hevel. Okay, they don't add any heat, they just keep whatever heat is to keep it in, as opposed to adding heat to it. But there are some opinions that hold that Hatmana, we saw this, is actually just having direct contact with the fire, sitting on top of the fire. Okay, and maybe the fire comes a little bit on the sides, but just a little bit, that's enough. That's already considered hatmana. Most opinions don't think that that's hatmana, but some opinions say that direct contact with the fire, even just at the bottom, like it's sitting in the fire, would also be hatmana. And what we learned already, I'll review, is that if you're putting, but now we're going to learn it inside, if it's something that adds heat, then what do we say? You can't do it even from before Shabbat, because it's just like shehiyah. Why? Because we're worried if we allow you to put it in something that adds heat, you might end up also being matmin, what we call biremetz, which is these fiery coals, in which case you might come to stoke the coals. Again, you're going to want to have it a higher heat. There's actually a very interesting debate, Rashbam and Rabbanit in the bottom Tosfot here, about whether if the whole issue of adding mosif hatmana b'davar mosif hevel is because you might stoke the coals. Well, then are all the things we learned about shehiyah, about stoking coals, relevant to here? Like, what if it's already fully cooked? So maybe it is allowed if it's fully cooked, and there's a debate. Okay, so the Rashbam says, "Demaire bebashil v'lo bashil." The Rashbam says, if you look at the first line of Tosfot, of course, Rabbeinu Shmuel, that's the Rashbam, he says, it doesn't make a difference. All those issues, they're not relevant for Hatmana. Hatmana has its own unique criteria, and whether it's fully cooked, partially cooked, it doesn't make a difference. It's asur. But Rabbeinu Tam thinks that it actually is the same criteria apply, and about ben malcha ben drosai according to Hananya, and if it's fully cooked according to the rabbis, then you're allowed to do hatmana b'davar mosif hevel. So that's a huge machloket between them about this. Another interesting thing I found is that in the Yerushalmi they give a few different reasons. Okay, the other thing is that you can't be matmin on Shabbat. So on Shabbat, even if you're not adding any heat, you still can't do hatmana. And the Yerushalmi brings 2 very interesting reasons. They say, Mishum bitul beit hamidrash. Apparently, there was always a shir in the shul after davening, and they didn't want people to be busy doing stuff on Shabbat, preparation for their food, so they didn't allow hatmana on Shabbat, so people could be in the beit midrash, which is interesting. And the second thing is, which is really connected, which is that we want people to finish all of their tasks before Shabbat. Okay, so we don't want you to be spending your Shabbat dealing with the cooking stuff, right? We all know that feeling right when you get into Shabbat, like whatever's done is done. I can't do anything more. And then all of a sudden you just get into the mode of Shabbat, right? Friday, it's just so crazy. So that's the idea, according to the Yerushalmi, of forbidding hatmana. We don't want to allow any kind of preparation, even though we all know that we do preparation for food on Shabbat. But presumably we're talking about Friday night when Shabbat comes in, and usually at that point you're basically done. And maybe this is a good source for, if you take the Yerushalmi very seriously, then you might say, well, make your salads before Shabbat, and all those things that we push off potentially, and we say, oh, we'll do that on Shabbat. Theoretically, this is kind of saying, well, don't do that, okay? So anyway, by the way, the whole thing about not missing the Beit Midrash is very interesting, because it was generally the women that were dealing with all these issues. And it seems that there was even an interest in allowing the women to be part of what goes on in the Beit Midrash, because they were the ones doing the cooking and the preparations, and that's clear from most of these sources. And yet we're going to say that, the issue is Bitul Beit Midrash. So just a nice point. So let's start our Mishnah. First of all, there's a very classic structure of Mishnayot where they say, this is allowed and this isn't allowed, and which is allowed, which isn't allowed. So, and it's an ABBA structure. Today we're only going to get to the Ein Tomnim. It's just like the second part started like that also. Ein Tomnim lo begefet, okay, not with the leftover olives, okay, the stuff that's left over after you press the olives, or maybe it's from sesame also when they made tchina or things like that. We're going to have a debate in the Gemara which gefet are they referring to. The lo bezevel, not with manure. The lo bemelach, not with salt. The lo beseed, not with lime. The lo bechol, not with sand. Bein lachim, bein yeveshim. These things, the assumption is when you gather these things together and you put them in a pile, they create a lot of heat, whether they're fresh or whether they're dried out. The lo betevin, not with hay. The lo bezagin, not with the dregs of the grapes that are left over from the wine after you press them. V'lo b'muchin, not with soft cloth. V'lo b'asavim, and not with grass. Bizman shehem lachin, aval tunim behem kashem yibeshim. These items are already they're only going to be a problem when they're fresh and not when they're dried out. When they're dried out, the assumption is they're already not creating that much heat, and therefore it's allowed. Ibayu. So now the Gemara asks, get the shel zeitim. Tanan aval deshumshim and shapir dame. They all knew that the dregs from the olives created more heat than sesame seeds. But the question is, which dregs were they talking about in the Mishnah? So if they were talking about gefet shel zeitim, then you would say, aval deshumshim, which creates less heat, shapir dami. It would be okay to do hatmana with them. O dilma deshumshim, or maybe the Mishnah is actually talking about sesame seeds. The choshke de zeitim, and then obviously zeitim would be a problem also. Okay, so we don't know. So Tashma, they say, let's try to learn from here. Amar Rabbi Zera mishum chad de Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Zera said the name of one of the rabbis from the house of Rabbi Yanai. Kupasha tamam ba'asur lahanicha legefet shel zeitim. If you have a box that you put the food into, you kind of wrap the food in this box, and you put it, now that's obviously not something that's mosif hevel, but you put the box on gefet shel zeitim, then it's forbidden. Okay, asur lahanicha. You can't put it on gefet shel zeitim. Shmamina shel zeitim tnan. So here you see they're talking about gefet beitim. They're talking about hatmana. It must be gefet shel zeitim, which means that it's only gefet shel zeitim. So the Gemara says, no, la'olam ema l'chal le'inyan hatmana d'shum sheminami asur. No, we could say that our Mishnah was referring to shum shemin also. Why did they specifically say zeitim, which sounded like shum shemin would be allowed? Why? Because that's not the same as our case. Notice the differences. If you're talking about how much heat do they create and you want to wrap something in that kind of heat, so zeitim have a lot of, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. If you're talking about asuke havla is not hatmana. Asuke havla is how much heat do they create. You wrap this item, in the case that they just brought, they wrapped food in a box and then they put fire underneath it. That's not the same as being matmin with a material that has the heat in it. That's different. So here we're talking about that the gefet of zeitim created enough heat that now that you had your food in this kupad, that would be forbidden to put it on there. That's what we call a suke havla. How much heat is created? A lot of heat is created that's going to heat this food that's wrapped now in the box. But havla deshumshim and lo maske havla. But sesame seeds are not going to create that much heat. So in the case of the kupah, we're going to say that's okay. But if you're going to actually wrap your food in this item, then even the sesame seeds create enough heat to make this prohibited. Okay, so there's a difference. We're not, even though that was talking about hatmana, it was talking about hatmana in a different way. It was talking about hatmana, and then you did hatmana on something that didn't have any heat, and then you put it on a heating element. That's not the same as having a heating element, right? like a crock pot, right, is where you have something surrounded on all three sides. Because some people, by the way, in a crock pot say that when you leave your crock pot on over Shabbat, so first of all, you have to cover the controls because so that you have to have a kalim, right? You see your children's not cooking or it's burning, right? You might change the heat. But the other issue is that maybe this is hatmana in a davar hamosif hevel. Now, hatmana is it has to be surrounded and tightly wrapped on all three sides. So what some people do is they say that you have to actually separate your crock pot on Shabbat from the base, and so that there's space in between and then it won't be hatmana. And therefore they put like rocks or something inside the crock pot so that it's not hatmana on all the sides. Okay, so there's an issue with crock pots theoretically, according to some opinions about how to use crock pots on Shabbat and are they considered hatmana or not. And that would be hatmana b'davar mosif hevel, which would be forbidden. Okay, so that's it for today. We'll pick up more with this tomorrow.